All right, is everyone scared yet? I'd say as a person who's been in high tech for most of my life, I find this subject thrilling. But as a community leader, as a mother, I'm actually pretty terrified, right? If you think about what's going to potentially happen in the workforce and in how we live, there's a lot of disruptions coming. So we have a great panel here today for you to discuss the issue at hand. We have Young King, who is the CEO of Digital Harvest and co-founder of Oregon's Unmanned Aerial Systems, Future Farms out in Pendleton. Ed Feser, Provost of Oregon State University, and Chris Harder, Director of Business Oregon. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you.
So, Young, I want to start with you. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on and how it's going to put Oregon on the map with respect to technology development.
Okay, so thank you for the opportunity. Before I talk about our company, which frankly is a minor topic, particularly what Steve Brown just talked about, I'm in agriculture, so let me set this up about what we do, but more importantly, what problem do we solve and what's driving that problem. And so the census data from USDA has agriculture at $212 billion per year. That's just annual revenues from crops sold. In an environment of that magnitude, if you think about most of the management economic decisions are made reactively using what I call sort of a nerdy way, an analog signal. So you don't know exactly what you harvest until you after harvest it. After you harvest and you know what volume or mass you have, then you make decisions. Do we sell it? Do we have enough? Do we need to buy it from somebody else? So all these decisions, if you envision an industry that has $200+ billion per year, are made reactively. And what artificial intelligence and machine learning particularly does for us, it enables us to deliver solutions that where we now are able to predict yield about 6 months before harvest and provide that data analytics to our customers. So we're at the very, very beginning of taking agriculture from that analog reactive decision-making realm to predictive decisions once it's digitized. So that trend is going to be a force that we're going to have to reckon with. And the question is, what is Oregon going to do about that? And again, we provide a very, very small example. Second to that, again, more relevant to the discussion, let me talk about the asymmetry that exists. So we're a company of under 10 people. Our customers are multi-billion-dollar corporations. And we cook with the same technology sauce as probably anyone out there that has access to machine learning, artificial intelligence. But a small company of under 10 people is able to deliver analytics where it changes the operational behavior of a multi-billion-dollar company. And that's not boastful. That just says this is the power of technology that is hitting agriculture. And again, what are we going to do about that? So I'll just stop there. I think I've taken up my 3 minutes and pass it on.
Thank you. Ed, tell us, how is the Oregon universities, how are we preparing for this next wave of technology? What's happening on the workforce front and with students coming into our system here in Oregon?
Yeah, I'm still adjusting to John's statement that I've only got 4 more years as a prime age male.
Right.
You know, what do we? I think there are 2 things that higher education needs to do to deal with this. And the first, of course, is build a skilled workforce. So we heard a lot about that from a number of people. I'm an economist as well, so I'm a dismal scientist, but I think history is replete with examples of where we've feared the loss of jobs due to technology and then seen the adjustments that led to subsequent job creation in areas we couldn't anticipate, as well as improvements in quality of life. So that's not a reason to be complacent, and I think both Steve and John are very accurate in that sense that we need to be proactive. For us, it's thinking about educating a workforce in those skill sets that are robot-proof, if you will, skills like creativity and design and cultural literacy, communication, leadership. And we're not as good in higher education, I think, as we need to be in making sure that students have those skills. And we need to make sure that students have those, that many, many students have those skills, that there is accessibility out there that the universities are affordable. We do have a broader challenge within higher education of access and affordability that we have to address. But we also have to take advantage of the technologies themselves. So augmented reality, for example, has a great opportunity. There's a great opportunity there to enhance the education experience to students, and we ourselves need to build those technologies into what we do. But the other big piece here for higher education is research. So John said it there, innovation, innovation, innovation. We have the #4 robotics program in the country at Oregon State. Several weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be to take a tour through the MIT Media Lab with about 12 other academics from around the country, and we happened to be introducing ourselves to researchers at the MIT Media Lab, and I mentioned I was from Oregon State, and somebody said, "Wow, you guys are doing fantastic things at OSU," and that's something we need to do more of, build on the strengths that we have in higher education here at Oregon State to actually contribute to the development of these technologies and the emergence of industries that take advantage of them, both to develop the technologies themselves and to deploy them. One last thing I'll mention is that we're not just looking at Oregon State at robotics and technology, we're also looking at the intersection with some of the societal impacts of those, the ethics of what these new technologies will mean for our society. We've started something called the Collaborative Robotics and Intelligent Systems Institute, which includes engineers looking at these questions. So we also, from the research side, need to take a pretty broad-based look at what these technologies will mean for our society, for Oregon.
Thank you. Chris. With respect to economic development, how do you think that this type of technology and the potential changes are going to impact the strategy for the state?
Well, I have two quick gut reactions to both John and Steve's presentations. The first is I'm an optimist, and I think economic development should be optimistic as it relates to innovation. Emerging technologies open up long-term more opportunities for people than they close. And the second kind of gut reaction, and this is a very important one, is we must be very intentional then about inclusion. So you saw it on the slides, rural workers, communities of color, our native and tribal communities are disproportionately represented in many of the occupations and industries at risk of automation. So those are kind of gut reactions from the data. But I wasn't necessarily invited up here to talk kind of what those reactions were. I do think it's important for those of us in economic development to communicate to leaders in this room and in other settings as well that we have a thoughtful economic development strategy moving forward that contemplates many of the trends that we heard about today. After a 12-month process, it's somewhat coincidence, our agency actually unveiled a new 5-year strategic plan today. Its goal to be much more thoughtful and proactive around the trends that we're talking about. One of the priorities that we highlight in this strategic plan is to innovate Oregon's economy. We know, many others in the room know, that innovation is a clear driver of economic growth. It's why the state has always invested in programs like the Oregon Innovation Council or the Oregon Manufacturing Innovation Center, which we talked about extensively last year on this stage, or the Oregon Growth Board, wonderful tools to help us fuel the creation of new technologies, industries, and companies. But what I take away most from a setting like this today is the need for us to get beyond just agency programs or one-off investments if we're going to stay ahead of this. We really do need leadership around a bigger, bolder vision to promote innovation here in Oregon. I will say as a key first step, and I'll emphasize first step in the sentence, is Business Oregon is working very closely with Governor Brown to outline a roadmap to elevate innovation as both a state investment and policy priority, and we hope to be able to talk a little bit more about that in detail forthcoming. To close this, we need to value investing in innovation, and that will determine whether Oregon will influence the direction of technological change and its impact on people, or merely react to it. So this is a big moment for us here in the state, and it's really up to leaders, many in this room, to elevate innovation as a state priority. So my response is to double down from an economic development perspective on innovation.
I think innovation is so important. I mean, we heard just before that 50% of Oregon's jobs could potentially be automated with the technology that is quickly being developed and already exists. When you look at development of technology from that perspective, there are so much potential on the innovation side to utilize that technology for things that we don't even have available to us today. Can you make some comments about what you might see coming in the future?
So I'm going to convey something that I knew, or I try to fight not to convey in settings like this, and that's sort of go against the grain a little bit. This notion that automation versus non-automated and it risks jobs, I think there's an alternative narrative there. So I'll give you an example. In about 2 hours' time, in Pendleton, at our development office, we'll have 2 high school interns, and as they finish school, come to our office. We'll have 2 other community college students come to our office, and they're working on a ground robot that, frankly, a few years ago only required degreed engineers to work on this kind of platform. But with the advent of development tools, open source connectivity, we're getting to a point where the innovation starts to happen on the fringes. And the fringe, I mean, it's no longer the well-endowed research universities, it's not the multi-billion-dollar research corporations. It is a small company like us out in the rural areas leveraging interns as apprentices, using all these open source tools, develop a ground robot to address the labor scarcity problem in specialty crops in Oregon. And one of the sort of the novel way we're doing that to provide an alternative to this automation is that we're building, rather than a smart robot, a dumb robot. This occurs today in medicine. Portland has several medical centers that has the Da Vinci medical robot. That's a dumb robot where a skilled surgeon provides the intelligence. And that same paradigm potentially can apply to agriculture robots where, again, using students as apprentices, these tools, and create these remotely operated ground robot that can address the labor shortage. And so I just wanted to give you an alternative sense that it's not binary. There's an alternative view at it, and certainly over time we'll get full automation. But for agriculture, the irregularities of agriculture requires a very, very sophisticated autonomous system. I think it'd be a long time before we get there. So in the meantime, just know that small company out in rural areas in Pendleton is trying to chip away at this problem.
Big stuff you're working on. So we just have a little bit more time left, but I would like to talk briefly about, if you had some advice for leaders in this room, how do you think we should better prepare ourselves for being on the leading edge of that new technology? What do we do on the workforce? How do we prepare people? What does that really look like as far as the strategy moving forward? Let's start with you, Chris.
Sure. Man, is it a cop-out to say education, education?
Not at all.
Fair enough, right. But it is so important. Look, those of us who are day-to-day wake up and look, what types of jobs can we help create here in Oregon, know that there isn't a magical solution where we can create jobs that only require a high school degree, pay a living wage, and now aren't susceptible to automation. They're few and far between, and they're going to go away here pretty quick. So we need a workforce that is much more educated and highly skilled, period. I think the second point I would make is we need to be much more intentional about connecting workforce development to innovation. So an example here, what sold many of us at the state level on why we should invest in the Oregon Manufacturing Innovation Center was the direct partnership between Portland Community College and industry R&D. It's a great example of students being trained to directly apply new technologies in the industry setting. We need to make those types of experiences more regular and robust here in Oregon.
Well, thank you. It's been a great discussion. And we're going to continue this discussion in the breakout session this afternoon. We look at a little bit further into what does the future look like? How can we lead the way in the Oregon economy for our future? So thanks so much.